Okay, so this is steps to make a bar graph. Now, everybody should have these notes, okay? So I'm not going to keep flipping back, but I will talk about them like 1, 2, 3, 4, and that sort of thing. All right, so first up with graphing, not the most important thing, but the most important thing is getting the correct data on there. But one of the major important things is making our data large enough to actually fill up the majority of our graph paper. So with that said, we have here, and it's a little hard to get fully in the camera, we have our landscape. The one thing we will never do is have our holes on the bottom, okay? If we do that, it to a certain extent shortens the amount of area that we have to work with, okay? So we either are gonna be in landscape with the holes on the top, or landscape, or portrait. This is portrait, correct? Anyway, up and down, where we have the holes on the right-hand side. But those are the two orientations that we're gonna have. Now, depending on what the data is in the graph and what kind of graph we're making, will tell us whether it's gonna be this way or this way, okay? So that's the first thing. Now, steps to make a bar graph. I want everybody, you should take a picture of this so we have it, okay? This is the data that we would typically graph while we were in class. Together. And I'm going to just count these because these are pretty important. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 pieces of data that need to be graphed, okay? And we are going to make this into a bar graph. So, no, I'm going to show you, but the very first step is if there's 5 or plus items, and there's 7, we're going to put it in landscape with the holes on top, all right? So that's the first thing we're going to do, all right? So we're going to draw our axes. Now with that said, we need to leave a couple spaces, okay? So that on the left side and on the bottom, we can actually put our labels of what the axes stand for. So I have a blue pen here, a Sharpie marker. You're not supposed to be using this. I am only using it so that you can see, okay, easier my lines that I draw. So we draw the first one, and watch it not work, because I did leave it out, like the whole entire break. And then we're going to draw the other one. Now typically, the x-axis, I like to leave about 3 spaces, okay? Make sure you use a ruler always. It's not acceptable to just draw them in, all right? Now, we need to label our axes, okay? So we need to determine which one is the y-axis, okay? This case, our precipitation is going to be on the y-axis, typically the numbers. So on the x-axis, we are going to actually have the names of the cities. All right, so we're going to name that precipitation per year, and then we're also going to name the x-axis the cities. We're going to make sure that if there is a unit, and most likely you're going to have units. I mean, you better, or else you're going to be measuring it. We're going to make sure that those units are also in there. So we drew our axes, and now we labeled them. Now, another step, I need to get a separate sheet of paper here, is to determine how do we actually determine the spacing, okay? So for example, how much is each block worth? Now we can look at this and say, well, the highest number is 148, so I need to go up to about 150, and that's fine, okay? But like I said at the beginning, the purpose of graphing and setting up your holes a certain way is to get the data large enough where we can actually compare. If you make it too small, it's harder to see the differences between the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 objects or whatever we're talking about. If it's going to be a line graph, or possibly a curve, if we make all of our data in one tiny place, it's going to end up looking like a line, even though it might possibly curve. So the larger, the more spread out we get the data, the better off we're going to be. All right? So if you look at your notes, okay, we need to determine the scale. So we're going to be doing the y-axis scale right now. So the first thing we need to do is determine the largest number. And then we're going to add extra. So like I said, so it's 148 centimeters per year, and we're going to go up to 150, okay? Then we are going to divide by the number of spaces. All right, so the number of spaces means I'm going to count up from my x-axis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 28. And I'm even going to count the ones up here with the circle, with the holes, but we're not going to actually use those. All right? So there are 28 spaces. Now I need to divide. So 150 divided by 28 gets me 5.36. Okay? We're not looking at significant figures or anything here. And so what that means is if we were going to go perfect amount, it'd be 5.36 centimeters per space. But that's sort of ridiculous to try to figure that out. Right? So what we're going to do is we are going to wait a second. We are going to go up. So going from 5 to 10 is quite a big of a jump, is a pretty big jump. So that's going to be fine for us. When you get into higher grades and stuff like that, maybe your jump would be to 7 or to 8. The reason we use 10 is because it's a nice round number, and so we know like half of a space would be 5 and so on. So I'm actually going to round this up. Okay, so it's 10 centimeters per space or block. And now I'm going to go fill that in. So I go back to my graph. You could already see I already had one made. And I'm going to mark every single one up to and maybe even above 150. And I will write in every single one. I know that might seem like a lot, but that's what we're going to do. So down here would be 0, and then 10, 20, 30, and so on. I went up to 170, but you don't really need to. You could go up to 150 because 148 is our highest. So that is our precipitation per year. You do not need to write centimeters because it's already written in our labeling of our axis. Okay. Now we need to figure out the cities. So how big are our bars going to be? Okay. How big are the bars going to be? So for one, we have 7 bars to make, okay? And so we need to figure out how many spaces are on the bottom. All right, there should be somewhere between 30 and 35. $38, so there's 38. So this is for our x-axis. So we're going to take the the number of spaces divided by the number of bars. So I have 38 spaces divided by 7 bars. All right, and we multiply that, or I'm sorry, multiply. Divide it, 38 divided by 7, and that gets us, is this even on the sheet? I gotta make sure it's on there. 5.4 spaces for every bar, okay? 5.4 spaces for every single bar. It's weird, when you go from picture mode to the video, it makes the video's screen so much smaller. So sorry about that. Gotta make sure it's on there. Okay. And once we do that, this one is actually okay if we sort of leave it at 5, or we kind of like almost like round down, okay? But let's just say that there's 5, okay? And that'll be fine. So here's our goal. So here's my scale for the bars, and I'm going to make each one 3 wide and skip 2. So let's say we came out to be 4 spaces, okay? What should we do? What should we do? It's funny thinking about this every single year. Sometimes I want to like, sometimes I want to change it. So the one thing we want to make sure we do is have the number that are in the bars wider than the spaces. So this is 3 wide for the bars, and we're gonna have 2 for the spaces. So if it was 4 spaces per bar, maybe we could have 3 wide and 1 skip. Okay, but we always want the width of the bar to be greater than the width of the blank space in between. Okay. Not a whole lot of space here. So we are not going to start, okay, right on the very end. So we're gonna skip our 2, all right, and then we're gonna do 1, 2, 3, okay? And then we're gonna skip 2 and do 1, 2, 3 here, all right? So we're gonna get our data filled in first before I go any further. So the first one would be Baghdad, okay? Baghdad, we're gonna go lowest to highest. And Baghdad is only 15 centimeters per year. So I'm gonna take my ruler, I'm gonna make a line across, straight, and I'm going to make this with my actual ruler. We're not going to, just kind of draw it by hand, not at all. The next is going to be San Diego. San Diego is 25. So once again, that's halfway between 25 and 30. Right. Next would be London. So we need to go over 2 spaces. And then it's going to be 3 for the width of our object, our bar. And London is 75. So I'm going to go between 80 and 75. I'm sorry, 70 and 80. Halfway. I'm going to finish making my bar. Got a little sloppy there. You should be better than that. After that, we go New York. So I skip 2 and then 3. New York will be 103. So it's not halfway between 100 and 110. It's a little bit less than that. 103. Okay. And I guess while we're doing this, I should have been writing them in. Next will be Sydney, Australia. That's 113. So like I said, just the last time, it's a little bit above 110. hard to see with this ruler. That is Sydney. So I got 5 done. And I need 2 more. So what are they? Miami's next. It's 148. So it's almost 150, but not quite. And then lastly, and you can see we actually have plenty of space even if we went down a little bit. From our 5.4, if we go down to 5, it's going to work out. It actually make us smaller this way. And our last one was, uh-oh, did I miss one? Oh, I missed one. Uh-oh. See, going back here, I thought Miami was the highest, 148, so be very careful. It was actually Tokyo. So this is actually supposed to be 152. It doesn't matter because since we actually went up and we weren't that far off, since we went up to 10, we're going to be perfectly fine. So hopefully you watched throughout the whole video and you caught my mistake. So it's Tokyo. And it went up to what, 152? A little bit above 150. Okay, now you are going to color those in. You're not going to be making dashes or polka dots or anything else. You're going to color them in with different colors for each one. All right, that's important. Now, up here, you wouldn't write this, but where these are at, these holes, okay, you're never going to write on there. So I'm going to go right below them. I'm going to put like a line, and we're just going to put the no grade zone. So you're not supposed to write there at all, okay? You write below it. The last thing we need to do is name the graph. So you see how it says average yearly precipitation for the table name? So that's what we're going to make the graph name. So you are going to write graph 1. If you only have one graph, it doesn't matter. You're going to write graph 1. And then we're going to name it. Average yearly precipitation. Okay. And there it is. And you would have this colored in there. Okay. So hopefully a lot of that was in the screen. I think you get general point anyway. But the one thing we got to make sure when we go back here, we got to make sure we get the actual largest number. That was my mistake. All right. It's funny because I have the stuff right in front of me and I didn't apparently pay attention to it. One thing to note is if we are, let me see here, if we are 1 to 4 items, see how we had 7? If we only had 4 or less, we'd actually have the graph this way, okay? And this would be your y-axis, and this would be your x-axis, and then you do everything the same. It would leave you a lot of space here, though. All right, there it is. Next would be line graphs.